Good afternoon, everyone. We're just gonna start our session here in a minute or so and just give everyone a little bit more time to hop on. Thank you for coming out today. And it looks like we are 2 o'clock on the dot. I'm going to begin our session. Welcome, everyone, to Building Program Capacity to Support At-Risk Populations, the Role of Sanctuary Center session. This is the second of 3 sessions in the NCUI Reclaiming Our Future, Indigenizing Strategic Planning to Address Social Determinants of Health, Community, and Learning. In this session, our presenter is from Ms. Diane Yazzie Devine, CEO of Native American Connections. She will be sharing best practices that support at-risk populations and sanctuary centers. My name is Molly Siegel. I'm a public health associate with the Technical Assistance and Research Center, better known as TARC at NCUI. Joining me from the NCUI team are Sabu Kojiman, Public Health Associate, Elizabeth Best, Public Health Manager, and Rachel Dow, Communications Associate. We are honored to have you all here today. We kindly ask that you place your name, organization, tribal affiliation, and title into the chat box. In addition, we welcome any feedback you would like to provide about your webinar experience in our survey, which is also posted in the chat box. Next slide, please. Here's our session again. Next slide, please. For those of you that are unfamiliar with the NCUI, here's a little background. The National Council of Urban Indian Health, also known as NCUI, is a national nonprofit organization devoted to the support and development of quality, accessible, and culturally competent health and public health services for American Indians and Alaska Natives living in urban areas. NCUI is the only national representative of the 41 Title V Urban Indian Organization, or UIOs, under the Indian Health Services in the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act, or IHCIA. NCUI strives to improve the health of over 70% of the over 70% American Indian Alaska Native population that live in urban areas, supported by quality, accessible healthcare centers. Next slide, please. A little housekeeping. As a reminder, the session is being recorded. All microphones have been muted upon entry. We always encourage participation and engagement in today's session. We invite all the participants to turn on the cameras and post questions and comments in the chat box. There will be opportunity also to participate in a Q&A session and discussion at the end of today's presentation. Also, please note the QR code on the bottom of this slide. If you scan it with your phone or tablet, you will be taken to our session feedback survey, where you can leave comments on what you liked most and how we can improve the session. Your participation and your feedback is always greatly appreciated. Next slide, please. This slide features some information on how to use Zoom. For those that are familiar with Zoom, you will have seen this already. At the bottom of the screen, you can find the chat box feature. Click on that to enter the chat, and please enter your comments and questions there. Next slide, please. Additionally, feel free to use the icons and emojis in the chat throughout the session. Next slide, please. As shown on the agenda here, we will begin our presentation at 2:05 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, followed by an amazing Jeopardy activity and a Q&A session at 2:50 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will end our session with an evaluation and upcoming events and adjourn promptly at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Next slide, please. The learner objectives from today's session are: identify key factors to strategically plan for cultural wellness and substance abuse, homeless programming, learn how to build and strengthen community and tribal partnerships to help secure funding for at-risk population programming, and discuss best practices for coordination of care and case management. Next slide, please. Now it is with great honor that I would like to introduce today's presentation speaker, Ms. Diane Didi Yazzie Devine. She is the CEO and President of Native American Connections. She has been working with Native American urban and tribal entities since 1972 and has been employed as the CEO of Native American Connections since 1979, so for over 40 years. NAC is a 501c3 Native American operated nonprofit corporation that provides comprehensive behavioral health services, affordable housing, and community-based economic opportunities. With Native Americans as the priority population, NAC offers innovative research-based behavioral health counseling services integrated with Native cultural and traditional healing practices. In addition, NAC developed, owns, and operates over 1,200 units of affordable housing for working families and permanent supportive housing for homeless individuals along the light rail of Central Phoenix. NAC is also the leader in multifamily housing, LEED Platinum certified buildings. Ms. Devine has an MBA from Arizona State University and was inducted into the ASU WP Carey School of Business Hall of Fame in 2012. Ms. Devine holds an international state licenses in substance abuse counseling. Let us welcome her with a heart emoji in the chat box, please. And with that being said, next slide, and it's all yours. Take it away.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank Nakui for recognizing the services that Native American Connections provides and for asking me to be here today. We have a small but mighty group, and hopefully we'll have some time where you can ask questions, or I can provide information that you might be most interested in receiving today. So I'm just going to start. I always start my presentations with this picture. I really feel like this depicts what Native American Connections does. And it provides safe places and healthy environments for the family where we can break the cycle of addiction and trauma and bring our community to a healthy mind, body, and spirit. Next slide, please. Native American Connections was founded in 1972. This is our 50-year anniversary. We're actually co-located in the same building with the Phoenix Indian Center, and they're 75 years old. So I feel like our organizations, along with another UIO, Native Health, we're actually a sanctuary center for the urban population in the Phoenix area. This is the first house that Native American Connections opened 50 years ago. And from this small 16-bed men's recovery center, we've expanded and leveraged the use of this facility and the services we do for the next 50 years. Next slide, please. And that facility was located right in the heart of downtown Phoenix. And so the Sweat Lodge was actually built in 1980. We still operate it today, 42 years later, in a different location, but this lodge provided that safe draw and place for people to come right in the heart of downtown Phoenix. You can see the buildings and the electric lines, but still we had a sanctuary right here at that small program called Indian Rehabilitation. Next slide, please. And from the very beginning, we recognized that some of the national best practices, maybe you work with SAMHSA and CMS and other national organizations, and they had best practices that you were supposed to utilize, but we knew that there were 1,000-year-old practices, traditional practices from the communities right here in Arizona. There's 22 tribes here in Arizona, and 28% of the state is tribal land. And we knew that there were traditional healing practices that we needed to really put forth as our best practice, along with some of the national requirements that we were engaging in. So that blend of Western healing and traditional healing is kind of what's anchored Native American Connections the last 50 years. Next slide, please. This is just me. I put a few pictures. A lot of people ask about, what I like to do because I worked here 43 years. This is me hiking in Nepal in the Himalaya range. And we're at about 17,000 feet right there, with that peak is 26,000 feet. This is from the 1990s. Next slide. So I'm sitting in this building right here. It's called the Native American Community Service Center. We're actually co-owned and co-located with the Phoenix Indian Center, 70 years old this year. The Gila River Indian Community Center for the Gila River community, and the Tohono O'odham Community College. We have other nonprofits that are in the building, probably about 5 or 6 others, but these are the 4 tribal and urban Native American programs that and as you can see that it's right on the light rail, and it's right across the street from the former Phoenix Indian School. So we're at Central and Indian School, which is the heart of Phoenix and the heart of the urban, the original urban areas where Native people lived as they came into the Phoenix area. Next slide, please. So what Native American Connections was originally known for was our substance abuse recovery services. We opened our first residential facility in 1978. And today we operate over 120 residential substance use treatment beds. Next slide. I think what sets our recovery centers apart is that we consider the healing of the entire family. Even though there's not a Medicaid code or some billing code to treat the entire family, the medical service codes aren't set up, for healing. They're set up to provide a medical procedure. And so we designed our programs to really wrap services around the entire family. So at the Patina Wellness Center, we serve women, pregnant women, women with their dependent children, men with dependent children, and couples and families. So, and then, between our 2 centers, transgender identification can choose which facility they feel most comfortable at. But I'm going to say this center is predominantly where we have our children and families, because we actually have a child care center incorporated right into the substance use treatment center. Next slide, please. So one of our primary populations to provide services is pregnant women, and pregnant women that have been using opioids, and so they're opioid addicted. And we have a partnership with a Hushabye nursery that provides services to the drug-affected infant once they're born. Most of you probably know that you don't do withdrawal during pregnancy because the infant cannot withstand that withdrawal period. And so that withdrawal occurs after the infant is born. And so the parents or the mom is with us, and then the infant is in Hushabye nursery. And then rather than going in our state, if an infant's born with opioids in their system or other illegal drugs, there's a placement into foster care, immediate report and a placement into foster care. This intervention and this service that we provide prevents that from happening. That really takes that model of family healing, keeping the family together, the roles of the family, that responsibility, from removal of the child, and the infant gets to rejoin the parents in the recovery center. Really important aspect of what we do. Next slide, please. And then here, this is, again, we're at the Family and the Women's Treatment Center, and this is the Sweat Lodge, the new lodge that was built when we moved into this center from the old Indian rehab building that you saw. And the women themselves take care of the lodge, and we have both people from the community and people on staff that are Sweat Lodge leaders. At both the Men's and Women's Center, we sweat once a week, and it's fully integrated into the other healing services that we provide at the center. Next slide, please. And there's the women, some women in the lodge. Next slide, please. And then the talking circle, we actually have these two beautiful talking circle rooms that we designed. A lot of people are interested in what Native American Connections does, because we actually build and develop, own and operate our healthcare centers as well as our housing, and looking at the cultural design of how it feels and healing places in that design of the place is really important to how we construct and then operate our facilities. We do ask our architects to sit with the people that are going to live there or participate in service, whatever it is, and to do a storyboard with them, maybe even over an 8-hour period, where they're really learning what the people that are going to utilize the service want it to look, feel, and like for their journey of recovery. And so the talking circle is an important ceremony. We also do our graduation ceremonies in a talking circle format as well. Next slide, please. The incorporation of art therapy and laughter and art, a lot of mask making, and maybe drawing some of the healing that needs to happen, and the trauma experiences that they can't express, they can do through music, art, laughter. We have fashion shows and talent shows and concerts, and we have a parade each year, and here they're making there was a American bald eagle that was our parade marshal that year, named Aurora, and they're making a float to follow Aurora in the parade. And next slide, please. And so it's really important that we didn't always were able to integrate our physical health into our behavioral health services, and through NCUI and through NCUI support, we've been able to expand our medical services and now provide a full comprehensive integrated health system, and health education, health promotion, health prevention, disease prevention, in an integrated model in our behavioral health centers. Next slide, please. So this is the Men's Treatment Center. So it's right on the Phoenix Mountain Preserve. We really wanted to make a statement about having a healing environment. And so in our recovery programs, we start each day with meditation, and the men there are now able to go into the mountain preserve and start their day in their prayer right there in the mountains. Next slide, please. And just another picture of me. This is me hiking in California, and on the John Muir Trail. And I'm probably at about 12,000 feet right there, carrying 50 pounds. And that was a very hard trip for me. I think I probably weighed about 112 at the time, and I was carrying half my weight. So just a little bit about me, that that I center myself being closest to the land and to the earth. Next slide, please. And so on the same campus as our Men's Treatment Center, we also then decided that we wanted to build housing, because a lot of our residents that come into our recovery center, they're either homeless, or they've come out of the criminal justice system or the jail system, or they have an environment in which they can't really return to because everybody's still using, or it's just an unhealthy experience for them. And so they're looking at, places where they can continue their sobriety and their recovery and their mental health supports. And so NAC, from the voice of our behavioral health residents, we decided to become a housing provider. And you're going to now see about 20 years of our experience and expanding to what we consider one of the most important social determinants of health. And that's a safe, secure, affordable place to live, to be healthy. So this is 54 units of permanent supportive housing for unsheltered relatives, and 32 of those units are specifically designated for veterans, anchored with the vouchers, the Section 8 vouchers, what are called VASH, for veterans. So right here on the same campus, and then if some of our unsheltered and homeless population come into housing and they have addiction issues or other mental health issues that would cause them to lose their housing, they can just go over to the treatment center and participate in the recovery program, and we hold their unit for them. A lot of times people, when they go to jail or they go into treatment or some other experience, they become homeless at the time because they lose their housing. And here we're able to maintain their housing for them so that they get the health and support that they need and then come back into the housing. Next slide, please. So we're the largest provider in all of Maricopa County. We have a very large county here in Arizona. I think it's about the third or fourth largest county in the United States. And we're the only shelter provider for homeless youth. And this is home base. We have about 70 shelter beds for age 18 to 24. Next slide, please. This is predominantly the shelter services are funded by the emergency shelter funds through HUD, going to both the state and the municipality, which for us is the city of Phoenix. And then we apply for those shelter funds, both through the county, the state, and the city, to support our homeless youth, both in shelter. And then this is transitional housing for youth. This is called Saguaro Key. Right next door, it's you just go through the back gate of the shelter into the transitional housing. So as we're engaging youth off the streets, a lot of LGBTQ youth, some here in Arizona, refugee youth, and the rest Native and BIPOC youth that come into our shelter. It's a no barrier shelter. They can just call, and if we have a bed opening, they can just come right down to the shelter. We can shelter them the same day. And they actually live at the shelter. The length of stay at the shelter is about 6 months. And then when they get a job and they get some of the life skills under them, they can transition into our transitional housing program. Next slide, please. And there's some of the youth. And people ask where the youth come from. The youth out on the streets of Phoenix, we have about 10,000 people unsheltered in Maricopa County, 50 sheltered and about 10,000 homeless, 5,000 sheltered and 5,000 unsheltered. And our BIPOC community makes up a majority of the unsheltered population. So it's really the other youth that say, hey, home base is a safe place for you. And you're going to find people, like-minded people. So it's really the youth. We do some outreach, some street outreach and some navigation, but it's really the youth that say, this is a safe place to go, where you can really learn some skills, get your education, get a job, and get ready to move on to transitional housing. Next slide, please. So there's one of the units at the transitional housing, it is, they're tenants there. Now they become actual tenants with a housing lease, and they can have 3 6-month leases. And so really we call this where they can practice being a tenant. A lot of times our youth, they rent an apartment and they don't have the money for their utilities, or they don't have credit to get their utility bills. They don't have some of the life skills and decision-making to really prioritize their housing. They become homeless again. So really this is a way that they can be treated like a tenant, pay their rent, no more than 30% of their income. We have some partners that provide Section 8 vouchers for these units for the youth. So if they're earning a minimum wage here in Phoenix, their rent payments are probably about $250 a month. So very affordable to the youth as they're getting to learn how to maintain housing. Next slide, please. We have a big focus throughout our organization, regardless of what service you're in. We actually operate the former Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center, and we have a commercial kitchen there. And so part of our health promotion and disease prevention efforts are really about returning to indigenous foods and cooking. So many of the people who come into treatment, or they're in our homeless housing or youth shelter, they've been going to soup kitchens and places, or living in other people's houses, or couch surfing, and really don't have much control over their diet or know how to cook and how to focus. And so that's really become a big focus. The gentleman with the plaid shirt on, he lost over 100 pounds, and he's Hopi. He came through our recovery program. We have a strong peer support program where a lot of our employees were our former clients and homeless residents. And he returned to running as part of his Hopi culture and tradition, and now is a big runner, lost 100 pounds, and has made that transition from receiving services to someone who's now providing services. Next slide, please. This is me. I also was a long distance runner for a long time, and I ran the Boston Marathon, which is a qualifying marathon race. And in the 2000s, I actually qualified and ran there 3 times. So running was a big part of my what I do. I've been the CEO of Native American Connections 43 years, and there's days that are very difficult and stressful and painful. Hearing the stories from the community, and trying to navigate difficult systems. And what I did for my mental health was I was a long distance runner, and a lot of meditation. I never wore earplugs or listened to anything. I would think and pray and meditate. Helped me anyway. Next slide, please. And so this is another, this was a very old, blighted, about 1940s apartment complex that had really gone into disrepair, a lot of crime and drug activity. And so we bought the property, and it's right next door to the transitional housing for youth. So we have a shelter, transitional housing, and now this is permanent housing for unsheltered people. So this is the place where we outreach and engage right out into people that are homeless on the streets of Phoenix, our Native relatives, and they have this beautiful place to come and live permanently. We have Section 8 vouchers that are provided through the entity. You're going to see some development slides, so I'm not going to talk about the capital stack much until the end, but we feel like everyone deserves a safe, high quality place to live. Next slide, please. And so here's one of the units. This gentleman was homeless on the streets of Phoenix. He was actually living between the former Indian School Park and the Phoenix Indian Medical Center along a canal system. And this is right in between the Indian School and the Indian Medical Center. And so we really outreached everybody that was homeless along there, and they watched us build the facility. And he was our first tenant to move in and provided a safe place. We've been open for 13 years. He's now passed on, but he lived there until he passed away. And his family members were really grateful that he didn't die out on the streets, that he had a home and a community in which he lived. And he had a lot of chronic medical conditions because he was homeless for over 20 years. But at least he had the best quality of life he could until he passed. Next slide, please. And this is just another example. We have 23 service sites in the throughout the Phoenix metropolitan area. And so this is another one of I put this slide in here because this is also permanent housing for homeless individuals. And we purposely have been developing along Phoenix's light rail system and heavy transportation corridors to make sure that our residents who don't have cars generally, have adequate transportation to food and medical needs and social needs and cultural needs. And so it's one of NAC's strategies to really purchase land, build, and operate along these transportation corridors. Next slide, please. And just showing, the importance of common space and community space, gathering space. This site also has project-based Section 8 vouchers attached to it that bring rental subsidies in a very high market. So how does a homeless person come in and be able to afford paying rent? Well, our Section 8 vouchers are actually attached to our projects. So that's voucher is right there waiting for them. They just have to qualify, fill out the paperwork, which we do, and submit it to the municipality, which is the city of Phoenix, get approved. A lot of times they have a criminal justice background, and we've worked with the city to eliminate almost every, they used to, Section 8 generally doesn't like people that have assaults and anything that might be a crime against a person. We've been able to mitigate that. And the only things that they still refuse are people that are registered sex offenders and arson. Everything else, we've been able to work through that process and set policy with the city of Phoenix to eliminate those barriers. Next slide, please. And this is a very similar facility. This is 120 units. This is our largest homeless housing community. We have a lot of co-located services in those light brown buildings. We have St. Joseph the Worker. We have an FQHC medical provider called Wesley Community Center. We have specific units are designated for people living with HIV and AIDS. And as we know, there was an uptick during COVID of people with AIDS. And so making sure that we have the medical services and the supportive housing for people with medical conditions. We have a commercial kitchen there. St. Mary's Food Bank delivers there. We have Fresh Express, where they're bringing fresh produce at a very reduced cost. So just lots of community providers that make sure formerly homeless individuals have a safe, permanent place to live. Next slide, please. You can see that's a very big part of Native American Connections. Now, this is switching to a different population. These are our low-income working families. Again, you can see Divine Legacy located right along the light rail. That light building is our office building. So you can begin to see we bought a large land and our office building, and then we built housing next to it. So we would buy a piece of property, and always, whether it was healthcare services or other services or office, making sure that we had some kind of affordable housing. So I don't know where the people are from that are on this call, but in Phoenix, our average rents now are about $1,800 a month. And in downtown Phoenix, where we're predominantly located, they're well beyond $2,000 a month. Rent at Divine Legacy starts at $550 a month. So some of our lower income families are single parent moms and single parent dads. They can literally afford to live in our housing communities. And these are also permanent living situations, as long as they pay their rent. And they can live there, as long as they want to. So next slide, please. There's one of the units. Again, we're trying to build quality, regardless of price, regardless of income, regardless of race, regardless of, whether they have a criminal background or not. We believe that everybody is a important member of our community, and through recovery and through resolving trauma and mental health services and other important just healing services, people that have had struggled and had disadvantages can become the next healers and supporters in our communities. And so we provide housing that promotes that, where people feel good about where they live and they want to contribute, and they can afford to maintain their housing and raise their families. And then it gives them the energy and the healing to help other people in the community, giving back when they've been helped. Next slide, please. And so I didn't want to leave out our dads. We're seeing a lot more single parent dads. And sometimes there's a lot of focus on women, pregnant women, parenting women, but not as much focus on dads that are finding that they're ending up with custody of their children, single parents. And so really giving them a place. It's kind of a, a generality, but men are not quite as social, maybe don't reach out or build the networks that women do when they're single parents. And so when they come to our facilities, they have affordable place to live. We have after school tutoring. Each one of our kids gets a meal from Kids Cafe, St. Mary's Food Bank every day when they get out of school. And then childcare costs are soaring in the Phoenix area. And so our service workers are there to care for the kids until the parents get home from work. And so all the ways that we can do to support the family where they can, afford to live a healthy and high quality of life. Next slide, please. And this is in the heart of downtown Phoenix, where rents are $2,000, $2,500 a month. You can, a lot of people think this is an architectural drawing, but this is an actual picture of urban living on Second. And this is 75 units. And again, rents are starting about $500 a month, and really make a high quality place for our low-income working families to live. Next slide, please. And this is right across the street, same thing, right in the heart of downtown Phoenix, urban living on Fillmore. Next slide, please. And you can see the apartment complex with the large 20-foot windows. We just really wanted to design these healing spaces where not only could people afford to live there, but they felt good about living there. And you can see the amenities that we have, lots of barbecue grills, and all of our housing communities have playground areas and computer labs and fitness centers. And again, rent starting at $400 a month. And they're all along transportation corridors, so people can get it. We have a lot of jobs at our airport and a lot of jobs in our downtown Phoenix area in terms of the service industry. And people can walk to work or ride the light rail. And if they can't afford a car, that doesn't inhibit them because they're near grocery and banking and amenities and services and cultural activities. ASU, Arizona State University, is right across the street. So being able to live and not have a car is doable in a city like Phoenix. Next slide, please. And so here's a picture of a courtyard. This community is actually on the same property as that first healthcare center, the Patina Wellness Center. And so we have the women's facility and family facility, and now family housing right next door. Next slide, please. And I just want to put this slide in here because this is one of our grandmas that took custody of her grandchildren. I'm sure you're all experiencing that. And without the support of NAC and without the housing and rents and additional resident service supports that we provide her, I don't think she would have been able to care for her grandchildren. Her daughter eventually was incarcerated and got a fairly long sentence. So we knew that this grandma was going to need some support for quite some time. Next slide, please. It's one of our housing communities for seniors, Carefree under Central. Next slide, please. And what we find, the kind of services that are, in our homeless housing, it's really around chronic medical conditions and really providing that medical support in our homeless communities, getting access to food, access to transportation, mental health services. And the families, it's really about the children, making sure they have safe places after school and meals and tutoring and those kind of things. Now in our senior programs, again, it kind of flips back to social supports, medical services, transportation, very similar to a lot of our homeless properties. And so, there's a little bit different flavor for the resident services and the resident supports that everybody needs depending on who the service population is. Next slide, please. And in this site, again, when we were doing the financing, which I'm going to talk about in just a second, we actually raised the money for rental subsidies. So we knew that when our seniors moved in, they were not going to be able to even pay $500 a month. They might only be able to pay $200 a month. And so we actually raised the rental subsidy that got capitalized and is put in a reserve account. So when somebody moves in and their rent is $600 a month, but they can only afford $250, we're paying the rent subsidy for that senior to live here. A couple of things that we have here that we don't have at the other side is we have a beauty salon here. That was something that was requested by our seniors, that they wanted, you know, to have some of those amenities in this site. Next slide, please. Oh, that's me and you know who, President Obama. That's I think in 2019. So I had an opportunity to meet him a couple of times, and you know, I guess I'm not too embarrassed to tell you that I actually kissed him on the cheek. So it was one of my finest moments. So next slide, please. And so I just wanted to say that we're actually in kind of in the central core of Phoenix. You saw about half of our service sites. You probably saw about a dozen of them, and we have 23, and they're all along the central core of Phoenix, which really was the historical living space for a place for Native American people. And that's because we had a boarding school for 99 years. The Phoenix Indian School opened in 1891, forced removal of children until about the 1940s, but it remained open until 1990. So when the school closed in 1990, the Department of Interior traded it to some real estate developer in Florida for Everglades swampland, and we thought we had lost really the even though that school had a 60-year history of trauma and abuse and removal. Later on, some of our alumni and graduates had a good experience at the school from maybe the 1960s and 70s on. So the school, this elementary building was empty for about 30 years. And finally, because I used to look at it out my window from my office where I'm sitting right now and say, we really need to get back to that land, to that school, and tell that history. And now we have a long-term lease. It's now a park owned and operated by the city of Phoenix. And we have a long-term lease to operate this building and a gallery there. We have 3 curriculums now with elementary school, high school, and then community colleges where we teach the boarding school experience embedded into educational curriculum. We have a commercial kitchen there where we do a lot of our returning to indigenous foods. We have a large gathering space that holds 120 people. And then we have the gallery where we tell the story of the school. Next slide, please. And this is a picture in 1951 of the children standing in front of that building. And that picture just reminds me of the painful history, you know, that many people in the United States are unaware of, and that Secretary Helen has now brought a lot of light to. Next slide, please. So this is kind of our story of our community development organization. We were founded in 1972, really just trying to provide, as Phoenix was a relocation city and as Native people were growing, we now have 120,000 Native people living in the Phoenix metropolitan area, and when I started, there were about 10,000, and so you know, so we just really came in to meet the growing needs of our community, and it really was around substance abuse recovery, connecting people to safe places to live, and then to jobs. And then as we provided healthcare services, it was really our patients, our clients, our tenants that said, we really need housing. And that's how we became a community development and a housing organization. Next slide. I'm wondering where I'm going to look at my time here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the housing development side of what we do. Let's see. I'm pretty close. I think I'm over time, but so these are the types of housing we provide: motel shelter, youth shelter, the 120 treatment beds, sober living, which I didn't talk about much, but we have sober living sites. When people graduate from the treatment center, they can go into sober living, which is temporary, and into a continuum of care. This is where our case management and case coordination comes in, where they're going from residential treatment to outpatient treatment, living in our sober living, getting jobs, and working with workforce development, and continuing that path of healing and Then we have about 40 units of that homeless housing for unsheltered relatives, for permanent supportive housing, and about 850 units of affordable housing. It's kind of, so that makes up, you know, our, and we have 300 units in development right now. So we're a busy organization around housing, but that housing really is the link, the healthcare and housing link that was established during COVID. That's exactly what we've been doing for 40 years. Without safe, affordable places, people can't improve their healthcare outcomes. Next slide, please. I'm gonna go through these really quickly. Next slide, please. So this is the capital stack of the financing and funding. I just want to say all of our funding is not tribal funding or IHS funding. It's all competing in the general funding strategy like anyone else that's building housing. The Federal Home Loan Bank. So we're just competing as a housing developer. No native specific funds. So I actually think that's good because we're not using precious tribal or IHS dollars on housing. We're just competing. We're bringing tribal housing, Native American housing, using the broader aspect. So any UIO can use the same capital stack we do. There's no restrictions around it. And some of the communities are actually, tribes are investing into UIO services and housing so that they can actually bring additional dollars. This is just competing in the marketplace for the financing it takes to build these housing. Low-income housing tax credit program, Federal Home Loan Bank, HP, home funds and CDBG funds, either through the state, county, or city that you're in. The CDFIs like Enterprise and LISC and La Raza, all national organizations that do pre-development and development loans. Next slide, please. Urban Living on Second. Next slide, please. This is a capital stack for Urban Living on Second. They're pretty much the same, except maybe different foundations or different banks are actually investing and buying the tax credit equity. So in our affordable housing, we do have some perm debt. Like, what's the cost of this? This might be $15 million development. We probably have $1 million of debt service. That's how we can keep our rent so low, is our debt service. We're actually selling the low-income housing tax credit to a entity that's buying that future tax benefit. We're building with equity. And so we don't have debt service or much, which keeps our rents extremely low, like you saw before. Go ahead, next slide. Next slide, please. And again, permanent supportive housing. We try to have no debt in our homeless housing because our tenants can't pay rent. They don't have income until maybe they get on SSDI, but the maximum rents generally that are paid in our homeless housing communities are maybe $225 a month. And then the Section 8 vouchers, that's why we have Section 8 vouchers, no debt service, so that we can actually operate these properties over a long period of time, keeping them at the quality in which we designed and built them without tenants being able to pay that rent. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And same thing, you're kind of seeing a repeat of the capital stack. They all have a little bit different fund. You can see this one's 12 million. I don't have my glasses on. And so again, this is a homeless housing community. So again, looking at trying not to have any debt service on those homeless housing communities. Next slide, please. I think I'm done. And so these are just the rules. You need to pay attention because there's a little a quiz that you can earn points. And so this is one of I'm just saying, okay, pay attention. So these are the roles that NAC plays in the real estate development process. We're actually the owner of all the properties. Everything you saw, we're the owner, except for the Indian School, long-term lease. We develop, we're the developer, the real estate developer, and we do the financing stack. We put that capital stack together. We're the, we manage the construction. We don't do it. That's a contracted role, is the construction contractor. We're not the architect, we contract that role, but we're the operator and the property manager for the long term. We built a property management company because no one knows our tenants better than we. We're the service provider and we do all the compliance and audit. And I think that's my last slide. And let's play Jeopardy.
It is your last slide. Thank you so much, Ms. Diane Yazzie Devine, for that remarkable session on sharing your work at the Native American Connections. We're honored that you have shared your work in the last 40 years with us. I'm hoping everyone can please place a clap emoji in the chat to show appreciation, maybe a heart emoji. We're actually going to skip over today's game, unfortunately. So Rachel, if you could just go to the question slide, because I know I have questions, and I'm hoping that maybe you guys have questions. And we want to, you're a little bit too far back, but that's okay. And one more, perfect. So I want to open up the floor at this time. If you have any questions for Ms. Didi, can you please come off mic or place your questions in the chat? I promise maybe next time we'll do a fun game, but I did not want to stop this powerhouse from talking. She had such an amazing session, and we are completely honored to have you here today.
There was one question that came in earlier by Selena asking, does NAC offer housing only to Native Americans?
So because we compete in the marketplace and all of our funds come from general HUD and they're not tribal specific or IHS specific, we are required to provide fair housing. So we do serve all populations. About 65% of who we serve on our healthcare side is Native American, and about 45% of who we serve on the housing side, the affordable housing side, is Native American. And then on the homeless side, it's about 60% as well. So 60 plus on both the healthcare and the homeless housing side, and about 45% in our affordable housing, because we are a fair housing provider, and whoever comes, everyone wants to live in our housing community. I'm going to send it, it's generally BIPOC communities that live with us, but we have to serve anyone that reaches out and qualifies for our services. But we only market and advertise in the Native community. We never market outside the Native community. But that's a good question. If the tribes would invest more in their NAHASDA dollars and their ICDBG and some of the tribal housing funds, we could then have a preference.
Appreciate that answer. And thank you for asking that question. We have another question in the chat from Liz Best at Nakui. What has been your biggest challenge, and what strategy did you use to work through it? And I know you've worked there for 40 years, so it's a pretty big question, so take your time with it.
Yeah, I would say the biggest challenge is, I think COVID really brought to light. I mean, we've always known that, but the systemic racism that prevents people from accessing services. Native American people are overrepresented here in Maricopa County in homelessness, and particularly the unsheltered population. So they don't want to go into the big shelters. They don't feel safe. They don't feel comfortable. And so really bringing a light to making sure that we're removing the HUD and the national barriers and a lot of the financing barriers that have systemic racism built into them. So I'm going to say that's a big challenge. We have a Native American coordinated entry system for chronic homeless. If you know the HUD continuum of care and the McKinney-Vento funds, they're very specific, and Native people don't fit into the homeless definitions. They don't go to the shelters, and they don't get entered into the HMIS database system, so they never get into housing. So Native American Connections has a actual formal agreement with the, what do they call, the lead agency and coordinated entry in Maricopa County, that Native people can come directly to Native American Connections, and we can navigate them directly into our housing. Little bit different than, that's why we have a higher percentage of Native people. Now, if we do have to still serve all populations, but this coordinated entry system is quite unique in the United States. And that was a result that we worked hard on that here to really combat the overrepresentation of Native people and homelessness and unsheltered homelessness. So I'm going to say that's one. And I'm just going to say the other is, navigating complex systems like Medicaid, IHS, tribal monies, tribal funds, just not letting people fall through the cracks, making sure that you, at those points where people are changing from service to service, people just come in, they just have needs. They have wants and desires, and they have needs and wants, both. And when they have to go to different places or have to navigate different systems, it's very difficult for them. So really focusing on that coordination of care, the social determinants of health, that they might come for one thing, but they really need 3 or 4 other things. And you're there and navigating that, providing that, and really looking at the whole person, the whole family, and their role in the community. So I would say those are a couple things. What keeps me up at night is, people are still dying on the streets of Phoenix. So.
Thank you for that answer. Really just impactful work that you're doing and have been doing. And I'm curious, as your time comes closer to a sunset, what does the next 40 years look like for your organization? What are you hoping, when we're all dust, what does it look like?
So the Phoenix is still growing, and the Native population is still growing. So kind of the planning for that is, you can plan for growth because the population is still growing. Now it's shifting. You've got a very young dynamic, a young population is coming in. We have a lot of very high number of Native American students at our universities, and we have 10 community colleges. And so young people, they have shifting needs, shifting access of how they want to access services. Their workforce development needs are shifting. And so I would say, the next 40 years are going to be, again, really listening to the community, not us determining, and that planning process and is really, what are the shifting demographics? What are the shifting needs? What are the shifting supports that people need? How do we grow our next, we have a lot of our long-term employees are going to be retiring and doing other things, or, and how do we continue to educate and grow our young, Native professionals to continue to provide you can see that we have some sophisticated, funding mechanisms and strategies, and that we have, well qualified and trained people to step into those positions as we change. But I would think, we wouldn't move away too much from health and housing, because those are kind of the core services that people still need. And then working with our community partners like Native Health, the Phoenix Indian Center, Intertribal Council of Arizona, and making sure that we're all supporting each other's strengths and filling the gaps for a continuum of care.
That was a beautiful answer. I feel like I could take another 3 hours of your presentation and just ask you another hour of questions. But unfortunately, we are already almost 5 minutes into the end of the presentation. So I am going to wrap up the question and answer and ask that we go on to the next slide, please. And I just want to thank everyone so much for joining us today for building program capacity support at-risk populations, the role of sanctuary centers. We hope you enjoyed the session. And then we'd also want to just say an amazing and wonderful thank you to our presenter today, Ms. Diane Yazzie Devine, for both your presentation, the question and answer, and all your hard work that you've done over the last 40 years. It is an amazing, and I'm speechless. I'm absolutely speechless on the work that you've done.
Yeah.
We appreciate any feedback you would like to provide about your student experience. If you could please complete the session survey by scanning it with your phone, the QR code, or clicking the slide QR code link that you see in the chat box now. You have the opportunity. There is a raffle going on for a mug and a blanket. So keep in touch.
A thermos
Oh, it's
insulated
a
mug.
thermos. Sorry, a thermos and a blanket. So some Nikui swag perhaps coming your way. And we appreciate any feedback that you would like to provide about your session. So please take the time to fill that out. And then
Molly, I did give permission for if people want to contact me for you to go ahead and give my contact information.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Yeah, of course. We'd love to share that out. And we'll be emailing out some takeaways from today's presentation as well, so we can include that for anyone that would like to keep in touch with the presenter today. So absolutely appreciate that. Next slide, please. Okay, please make sure to register and join us for Thriving Beyond Survival, Advancing MMIP/MMIW UIO Programming to win some more swag and also attend such an important session. The session won't be until January 20th, so after the new year, but we are hoping to have you there. Next slide, please. And thank you all again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you all at our next Community of Learning session and upcoming events. And just thank you again to our amazing presenter who we could not have done today's session without, and all of you that attended. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.